Hi everyone, Jared here, and today I'm going to talk about a game I've wanted to talk about for years, BS The Legend of Zelda, which actually stands for Broadcast Satellite The Legend of Zelda, or even The Legend of Zelda Broadcast Satellite version, or edition. The game was originally released as 4 different episodes, and the original broadcast dates were Sunday, August 6th, 1995 for episode 1, and then for the next 3 Sundays after that, capping off on August 27th, 1995 with episode 4. It proved so popular that the entire thing was broadcast at least another 3 times, perhaps 4. Dates are extremely hard to find with any sort of authenticity today. Believe it or not, but this was actually the 5th Zelda game to be developed by Nintendo after the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past, and Link's Awakening. Many speculate that it's for this reason why fans never got a follow-up to A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, mainly because the team was so busy working on these BS Zelda titles. For more information on the Satellaview, be sure to check out my Satellaview retrospective that I recently posted here on YouTube. Now let's get back to the game. Being the first Soundlink game, Nintendo actually made history, as this is the first game in the world to be a radio game. While game data was downloaded and stored on players' individual system via the same gig as broadcast, players also had a continuous live stream audio track which included a running commentary. All of the text you see written in the game in this video would have actually been read to players while they were playing the game, which is pretty damn awesome for 1995. Whoever said Nintendo was against voice acting in Zelda, pshaw! Given the game was broadcast once a week, players had approximately 1 hour to do everything they needed to do before the game was over, and they had to wait until the following week to pick up where they left off. That's why you see that timer in the corner of the video there. And also notice that it begins at the 7-minute mark. That's because you had to wait for everyone to download the game in order to start at the exact same time. The first thing you'll notice in this video is that the character isn't Link. Now that's because you take on the role of the avatar you use while you're in the Satellaview's or interface, whatever you want to call it. This is explained in the story itself. From various online materials, here's more or less what I was able to find. The goddesses create the Triforce, which grants the wish of anyone who touches it. Ganondorf, the evil prince of thieves, locates it, transforms into Ganon. You know, I don't know why he didn't wish for money, women, and peace on Earth, but hey, we'll never know. Ganon's evil influence then spreads all over Hyrule. The goddesses send a messenger to the king of Hyrule telling him only a special sword will be able to stop Ganon. The king creates the Master Sword. Who knew it was that simple? After the sword's created, a whole bunch of people from Hyrule try and wield the sword, but because of its incredible power, they're unable to. The king sends his 7 sages to create a seal to trap Ganon away until the day rises, when a person can step forward powerful enough to wield the Master Sword and put an end to evil. About 2 seconds after Ganon is sealed away, he breaks free, kidnaps Princess Zelda, and that's where the game begins. As luck would have it though, a portal opens up in that famous town whose name has been stolen, and a hero walks through the portal and emerges in Hyrule. That hero, ladies and gentlemen, is you. By entering the first cave there that you see at the beginning of the video, the old man basically, apparently, tells you everything that I just went through. And then from there you learn that the portal can only be open for 1 hour at a time, but the old man tells you, don't worry, relax, everything's going to be okay. All your items will be stored with the old man so that when you return, you basically won't lose your progress. And what's cool is that this old man actually plays directly into the gameplay as well, as periodically he'll actually come to your aid, and sometimes he'll even be not so helpful. He can actually pause the game, which you'll see in here, and he'll let you know of different things that are going to happen. For example, the heart piece that you see in the video when I find it, that's because the guy let me know where it was. Another time he'll say like, okay, I'm going to give you unlimited bombs now. Things like that. And all this played directly into the live action episodic nature of the game. And it also explains why you see the Zelda time clock, as it's not only informs you of how much time you have left to play, but also it tells the game during key sequences to trigger different real-time events. Now, you can also tell the overworld map has been altered from the original Legend of Zelda, but not too much. The original NES or Famicom disc version had an 8x16 grid, whereas this new version only has an 8x8 grid. Although it's clear Nintendo really wanted this quote-unquote remake, enhanced port, whatever, to be as close as possible to the original game. And gameplay remains virtually identical to that of the original Legend of Zelda, although you can see that the dungeons have been completely reworked, and that's why everyone pretty much considers this game the third quest, in reference of the original Zelda's famous second quest. All of the dungeons in the game actually spell out Saint Giga, which is pretty nifty and appropriate too. One of the best features though that's been added to the game has to be the new button that allows you to swap items. Basically, you got to remember that this was played on the Super Famicom's add-on, right? On the Satellaview. So because of that, you were using a Super Famicom or the SNES controller, which had way more buttons than the original Famicom's 2. So now the L and R buttons can be used to swap your secondary item. And man, is that awesome, because you no longer have to go into the main menu every 2 seconds. Players also could hold much more rupees. Well, many more rupees. In the original, I believe it was capped out at 255, but now you can go up. I haven't actually seen this, but I think you can go into the thousands now, which is pretty awesome. There was also a scoring system. When you finished at the end of the 4th week, you could actually see how many times you died, how far you progressed, did you kill Ganon or not, and winners would actually win prizes. Although what they are, who knows? They've been lost to time, I believe. I obviously don't need to mention the graphics or the audio. You can tell it was completely reworked with Super Nintendo graphics. And the audio we don't know much about, but I'll get to that in just a few seconds. First off, I want to go back, before I talk about the audio, I want to go back to the actual development of the game as a whole. This was the very first Satellaview game that Nintendo made, right? And they didn't want to be like the other ones, because basically the other Satellaview games at the time were extremely simple. Yeah, they had some quote-unquote online features, but it was all stuff to do with like having players basically compete for scores and things like that. It was never, they didn't have to play simultaneously or things like that. So Nintendo wanted to really mix things up. They essentially wanted a way for players to feel connected to one another. Simple as that. So they started sponsoring student networking projects with the hopes of creating a game that connected players to one another through the broadcast signal itself. And BS Zelda emerged from those projects. It was exceedingly difficult to make the game with no lag or bugs at this point in time, but once complete, it pretty much did exactly what Nintendo wanted. Sure, it didn't allow players to play with one another, but it did make it so that everyone played at the exact same time, heard the same live commentary, and directly competed with one another. So now you're likely asking yourself, how in the blue blazes am I playing this game if it was broadcast years ago and only playable for 1 hour a week at that point in time? Well, it's a good question. And the answer is emulation, my friends. Emulation. That's the only way to really play these games today. And even if it's not 100% exactly as it was back then, well, here's an overview of basically all the work that went into this, okay? Just to give you a clear idea here. First off, the game data had to be extracted from cards of players who were smart enough to keep the game data and not overwrite it. Next up, the game's data actually had to be extensively hacked in order to be playable in any form like what you see here. Today, thanks to the efforts of seriously countless individuals, there are working versions of many of the original Satellaview games. And if you're looking to try the Zelda games in particular, I highly encourage you to check out the BS Zelda homepage, which I've included in the video's description. So, what exactly was done after the game data had been extracted? Well, today there are tons, and I mean tons, of hacks, but the core idea into all this was just to get the game working again, and to do that was extremely hard. First off, they translated it, then came the audio, which I mentioned before, and that was a problem because while the game data did contain some samples for the soundtrack, it's unknown whether that soundtrack was actually used during the live broadcast or if a different soundtrack was put in. We also don't know for certain what text was read in the voiceover because obviously that's been lost to time. So we are just assuming some of the text that you see here. We're just assuming that that's what was said. The game can be played as close as they were originally meant to, though, and that includes like all the live events, the Zelda time clock, and things like that. That's pretty much what you're seeing for half of this video. The other half of the video, it shows the further hack, as I call it, which is officially known as the third quest, and that places Link and Zelda in the roles of the main characters, does away with the clock entirely, and as a result makes the game significantly easier, much more enjoyable. You can just play this leisurely as you would the original Legend of Zelda. And like I say, for this video, I've included both. Whenever you see Link as the main character, that's obviously the the third quest version. Whichever version you're interested in trying, though, I highly recommend you visit the BS Zelda homepage and give the games a download. They're well worth it. You guys should also know that the games have never been released outside their original broadcast, so technically this isn't stealing because they were never made commercially available anywhere in the world. Remember that these games were offered free through the download service so long as you subscribed and had all that other jazz. So yeah, this is the only way to actually experience these games. So that's pretty much part 1 of my look at the BS Zelda games. The next part I'll tackle is Map 2, or better known as the fourth quest. It won't be quite as long as this one, but you know, I just want to individually show you how each game turned out. So I hope you enjoyed this look at one of the rarest Zelda games of all time, and I'm fairly certain many of you guys out there will agree with me in saying that, damn it Nintendo, do whatever you can to release this as some sort of Zelda All-Stars. We want to play an officially translated version. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will be back very soon with another video in the BS Legend of Zelda series.